Beads. Join me in learning how to do crawl stitch while also adding in some peyote, going from that crawl to peyote, from single 11-0 seed beads to multi-hold beads as well. If you need any supplies, check the links below me to shop with us online. So as a prerequisite, if you're not sure how to do PRAW stitch or crawl stitch, you may want to break this video, check out the other YouTube video in the link below me, and learn how to do that. What we're going to be doing is going from our silver 11-0 seed beads and building up to multi-hold beads. To begin, I'm leaving about 10 inches of 0.006 gray Wildfire thread after a stop bead. The stop bead I'm sewing through 2 times, and it's going to come off my project. That's why I'm using a color that's not involved in my project. I have a size 12 needle on right here, and I have my pile of 11-0 seed beads. We're going to begin with a traditional PRAW stitch, which is Prismatic Right Angle Weave, and we're going to pick up 4 beads. These 4 beads are going to be the 4 sides of my right angle unit, or my square unit. The reason it is called right angle is because you're creating right angles inside of the beads. We're going to sew back through those first 3 beads and give a nice tight pull. Coming through those 3 beads, we've established a nice little square there. We have 1 bead that is going to be the bottom, 1 that's at the top, and 1 on the right and 1 on the left. I like to refer to these as my floor, my roof, and my walls. Coming out my right wall, I'm going to add 3 more beads. Another floor, another wall, which is now going to be the right wall of the new room, and another ceiling. Sewing in a circle, we're going to sew down through the bead our thread is coming out of. If you've not done this before, in the beginning tutorial of this, I show how to do this with different colors. We're going to sew through the floor, and we're going to come up through what is now the right wall. You'll notice our thread and needle is coming out the top rather than the bottom as it did the last unit before there. Coming out that top, I'm going to add 3 more beads to add another room or another square on. I have 1 bead that I added for the top, 1 for the right, and 1 for the bottom. Going back through in a circular fashion, that bead that my thread was coming out of, I come out through that bead in between my second and third unit that I've just created. Go ahead and sew through the roof of the bead, and you always want to come out through what is currently the right-hand side wall of the last unit you've created. That completes my 3rd unit. You can think about units and look at them as openings. So I have currently 3 openings in between my beads. I'm going to do the same thing for my 4th, coming out the bottom now because it switches with every unit. I'm going to add 3 more beads and sew down through that same bead. Rounding that out, I've added another floor, wall, and top. Sewing through the floor, I always want to make sure that I'm coming out through one of my walls, my right-hand wall. What I want to do now is make my 5th unit combine the first side and the last side together. So I'm going to combine the 1st unit and the 4th unit by creating a 5th unit. Adding in 1 more silver bead. I'm coming out the top of the right wall of the 5th unit. I'm going to go into the top towards the bottom of the left wall of the 1st unit. Circling that towards itself then, I need to add a floor. Since I just added the ceiling, I add 1 more bead, and I'm sewing back through that 1st bead that my thread was coming out of on that 4th unit. When I pull nice and tight, that creates a little tube for the project. I'm going to sew through what is the roof bead there, or that bead sticking up, and that completes my 1st row of my tubular raw stitch, which this is going to be PRAW because it's more than 4 sides, it's 5 sides. When looking at this, you should have 5 little seed beads that are sticking up that we're going to connect to as we go through and add on our future rows. Coming out and adding rows onto our PRAW stitch. So we have floor 1 of our building. We're going to create the 2nd floor, room by room again. We have our 1st floor, which was the ceiling. Now all those ceiling beads are going to be floor beads. I'm going to add 3 more beads and sew back through that same floor bead. Bringing the thread and needle around, I'm going to exit through my right wall. Always exiting through what is the right wall, which, not to confuse you, but that becomes the left wall as you build on. 2 more beads get added because I already have my one wall and I already have my one floor from the previous row. Adding those 2 beads, I sew through the floor from the previous row, and I sew from my right side towards my left, towards that wall that my thread was coming out of. Back up through that same wall, and that creates my second unit here. I always want to come out through that right-hand side wall, so I'm going to sew through the top and through what is now the right wall. Coming out the right wall, I already have my bead here that's going to be, from the previous row, my new bottom, or my new floor. So I'm going to sew through that bead. And again, if you need the tutorial with 2 colors, don't be scared to watch that too. I'm going to add 2 more beads, then sew back down through what was that right wall, which is now going to be the left wall, through my floor bead from the previous row of the peyote stitch, so from that previous little floor, and now I'm going to go through the right bead. That was 3 rooms that I added. Adding in the 4th room, I'm also using 2 beads. Going to sew through the floor that's already there as I add a new ceiling and my new right wall. Always coming back up through that wall that my thread was originally coming out of, which now switches to the left wall. Back through the top, and again out my new right wall. When I come out my new right wall, and I have my 5th room to add on the 2nd floor, I only need to add 1 bead. I'm going to go through what is now a floor bead, which was the roof on the 1st row, go up through that first left-hand wall from room number 1 on the 2nd floor, add a new ceiling, and down through the 2nd room. Once I'm there, I'm going to sew through the floor, up through that right wall that we caught on from room number 1, and through what is now going to be the new floor bead. So I have 5 beads sticking up along the top here that I'm going to go on and continue to add into my stitch. I'm going to do a couple more rows of this PRAW stitch, and then we're going to get ready to have some fun adding in multi-hole beads. Once you have a couple units and your right angle weave is building, what you want to do is start adding in your multi-hole beads. So if you add in your multi-hole beads, you can do this a ton of different ways. I'm going to show you here. We're going to switch to the peyote stitch, but we're going to begin with these SO beads. I've done Super Duo Minis, I've done RounDuo Minis, so we're going to stick to some SOs right here and check those out. So I'm coming out the last of my units, and what I'm going to do is add 1 of my 11-0, 1 of my SOs, and 1 of my 11-0. So back through that, what is now the floor bead. So this is not any different than what you've been doing. You're just using a different style bead. So up through that 11-0 that you added first, through the SO, down through what is now the new right wall. So the SOs are taking the place of the ceiling. So we're going to add 5 in as we go around here. From here on the right hand side, we're going to go through the next bead below, that is now our floor. Add in 1 11-0 and a new roof bead, a new SO. Go back through the 11-0 your thread was originally coming out of, and then back through that floor bead as well. So take in two threads through at a time if you can. There you can see that second right angle unit. Go up through the right wall that you just added that seed bead and out. When I come out, I need to add my ceiling, my SO, and my new right wall. Sew through the floor below it, and then also sew through that now left wall that your thread was coming out of. Again, you always need to get out through that right wall, the new right wall established. So I'm going to go through the SO and down through what is now the left wall for the next unit. going down through my floor bead, adding in a new right wall, a new SO, back down through that wall, and back down through the floor bead, up through that, what is now the right wall. And as I go through the right wall, when I'm adding my second round of beads, when you get to the fact that you need to add your fifth bead, it's just going to be one bead. Add in one bead, so down through the 11-0 and down through the 11-0 on the right, down through the floor bead as you add in just this last sealing bead, up through the bead that your thread was originally coming out of there, and out. From here, go through that SO, and you're out that first hole. So here what we're going to do is go through the second hole of the SO bead. I'm going to show you how we just kind of skip over, and then we'll build even more. You're going to go from the bottom hole of the SO that your thread is coming out of to the top hole. Your thread's going to be exposed a tiny bit on the side there of that little bump. And now our SO bead, the second hole, is now going to be our floor. So when I go in here, I'm going to add 3 of my 11-0s and go back through that same SO, going in from the right hand side, coming out the left to circle it up. Go through all of those seed beads, so that way you're coming out through the right hand side of the wall, just like we've been doing. Coming down through that right hand side of the wall, I'm going to connect to the next floor, which is going to be the SO. It's the exact same, so don't treat it any differently. I'm going to add a new right wall and a new ceiling. Go down through what is now the left wall, through the SO, and back up through the new right wall. Add in a new ceiling, a new left wall, and connect, or right wall rather, and connect to your floor from the previous row, your new SO. Back up through that bead on the left that your thread was coming out of, which is now the left wall of this next unit. Thread and needle come around through those 2 seed beads. Pull nice and tightly because you're going from something smaller to something bigger. Coming out that right wall, go through the SO. So when you're coming out down, you're going to go through the SO first. Add in a new right wall, a new ceiling. Down through my left wall, and through my SO. Up through my new right wall, so I'm coming out the top. When I'm coming out the top here to connect my last unit, I'm going to need one more ceiling bead. So you're adding in that one ceiling. I'm going to sew down through that left wall, connect to the SO that's already there through my floor, and back up through what is then the left wall. Give it a nice tight pull, and that shows you how the SOs are now through to a second portion of the design and have that kind of little bobbling effect. From here, I'm going to get to the top bead here, that top 11-0. I have 5 sitting towards the top interior, and now I'm going to keep going with a couple of my right angle units. Going in, adding 3 beads, going through the bottom. Here's my first room on my new floor. Going in again, add 2 beads, and connect to that top bead that sits right on top of the SO, which was the ceiling the previous row and is now creating and becoming the floor. Always coming out that right bead and connecting to the floor if you're coming out the bottom, or adding in 2 beads right away if you're coming out the top. As you go around here, the SOs will sit out kind of like a pinwheel along the design as you go through and add further to it. As you go in and add, and you have 1, 2, and 3 beads, I'll have 4 to add here. That's my 4th row, getting to the top. And as I come out the right side of my 4th room on this floor, I'll go through that wall on the right hand side, and I know I'm stitching quickly. Again, watch the right angle weave video and that PRAW stitch, and that'll help you tremendously. Go through that last floor bead, up through the first wall that you added on this row, and add a new ceiling. So each new row that you do, each new floor to the building that we add, you're adding 3 beads on your first go round, then 3 times you're adding 2 beads, and then the last time, connecting it all together, you're adding just 1 bead at a time. You'll be left with 5 beads with the hole sitting horizontally as you go in and connect 2 more rows and add and to further the design. As I'm continuing with my design, after a couple rows of my PRAW stitch, getting my rope, I'm adding in some RounDuo Minis, and the RounDuo Minis that I'm adding in are the metallic aqua. I'm adding in my last of my 5 beads, and what I'm going to show you is how to switch from the right angle weave to peyote stitch and do a multi-hold tubular peyote. I'm going to go back through that RounDuo Mini, just like I would with normal PRAW stitch, going up and stepping up from my bottom hole to my top hole. Instead of going back in right away and adding in my seed beads, I'm going to do a row of RounDuo Minis again. I'm going to add 1 RounDuo Mini, new one, and sew through the previous one there through the second hole. Again, add my next RounDuo Mini. I'll be adding 5, sew through the one already there. This is tubular peyote stitch. So you're going from right angle weave very easily to tubular peyote. Even with 1 bead at a time, not a multi-hold bead, a 1-hold bead, you can do the same exact thing. Going in here, adding in my 5th bead, I'm going to sew back through the blue bead that my thread was originally coming out of, through that metallic aqua. I'm going to sew through the first jet AB, and again I'm going to turn my thread and needle and go from the bottom hole of that same bead to the top hole. 1 more row of peyote stitch, I'll add 5 new beads, going through the second hole of that RounDuo and jet AB, and adding in the RounDuo Mini in that metallic blue. This will allow you, as you're adding in, to get that nice kind of popping and bubbling effect, almost looking like a beaded bead along your rope. You can use a huge variety of beads to create and continue this stitch. Going out and kind of pouring out a little bit more, I have 2 more beads to add. And then once I do my step up from the bottom hole, or the hole that I'm going through, to the top hole, finishing up through and adding my 5 beads through that first bead of that jet AB, I'm going to go through the metallic aqua bead that I added first and step up from the bottom hole to the top hole. That completes my second row of my peyote stitch. Now I'm going to go in and continue with right angle weave, just like I did after coming out of the SO. So now the top hole of that second aqua bead, I'm going to add 3 beads through and circle around through that first hole that my thread is coming out of. Go ahead and get my thread and needle over, so I'm coming out down through that first wall. Attach onto the next RounDuo Mini, since that's my new floor bead. Add in a right wall and a ceiling. Sew down through the seed bead on what is now the left wall, through the RounDuo, and out through my new right wall bead. So it's going to continue just like it did after the SO bead as we continue to add length to our rope and join in a lot of these different multi-hold, smaller, kind of tubular shaped different check glass beads. As you build longer and start adding, you can see this is a great idea for a rope if you want to make it a long necklace. You may have a bunch of different samples from us here at Potomac Beads. You can use a lot of those in here. This is a great way and a great method to not only learn this PRAW stitch and then going into that multi-hold peyote stitch, but also to use up a lot of extra multi-hold beads. Once you get all of the beads done, and you can see some of the different patterns that I've done, a couple that I've done a row of the mini duos and then the SOs, just a row of plain 2-hold bars with the SOs in between, keeping with more of just that black RounDuo Mini. And what I'm going to show you is if you want to make this into a bangle, how to seam up the edges. Now, if I want to make it a rope that goes over my head, same deal. If I want to go in and actually add a clasp, what I would recommend is, like we've been learning how to do just a row of peyote, coming out of one of your what is now floor beads at the top of this row, go ahead and add a row of 11 seed beads in that same peyote method, adding a bead, sewing through the next bead. Do that for 2 rows, and that'll kind of pinch that together and funnel it closer and tighter, which will allow you to put the end on. What I'm going to do is show you how you're going to attach the 2 ends together if you're working with this PRAW stitch. One thing I'm going to do is move that stop bead, if I can, kind of back a little bit, keeping it on, but having it there. Coming out my last of my rope, what I'm going to try to do is kind of flatten out my design, make sure that it can go over the widest part, the knuckle area of your wrist. So kind of try it out and try it on, and it will slide on really well for a bangle. What I'm going to do is line up my 2 ends, and we're going to basically create the walls to add our 2 floors together. We already have all the ceiling and the floor. I'm going to add 1 new 11/0 onto my needle, pick up the 11/0 that sits approximately across without the bracelet turning too much. Sew through that 11/0 from the bottom to the top on the other side. And now add another 11/0 after. So back through that first original, what is now the floor bead, from the side I was ending with, and give a nice tight pull. That's going to create a really seamless bond. Going on here then and kind of turning it in my hand, I'm going to go up through that first wall that I just added. Come on out through that right hand wall. Now what I'm going to do is look for my next ceiling bead, which is going to be on the right. Add my new right wall, sew through my floor bead, and back through that bead that the thread was originally coming out of, which is now going to be my left wall. Sew back through that same area, coming out through the roof bead, through that right wall bead. Once you're through that right wall bead, give a nice little tight pull to tighten up any thread. Spinning it around, you're going to sew through the next floor bead, which the floor bead is going to be closest to my pastel emerald Essos. Add my new right wall, sew through my next ceiling bead. Down through that left hand side, down through the floor. You can see it's hard not to turn it in my hands. I'm trying to keep it the same way so you can see what is that top and bottom. Give a nice tight pull. Sew out through that right wall. The right wall becomes the left wall as we go in and connect to the ceiling bead. Add a new right wall. Sew through the new floor. And then work your needle in a round fashion through that right angle weave way over to the right wall that we just added. You can see I'm spinning this in my hand and in the design. Then I'm going to sew down through that new right wall, down through the floor bead. And as I come into my last area here, I don't need to add any beads. All I need to do is connect all of these beads. So I'm connecting all 4 kind of open spots right there, going up through the right wall, through the floor or through the ceiling, down the left. And the nice thing with right angle weave is it will look seamless. So whether or not you're doing this as the bangle, like I'm doing, you're doing it as a longer piece, as a rope, you have all of these options for all the different smaller, say, than 6 millimeter to hold multi-hold beads. When I come out here next to that original starter thread, I'm going to keep my thread and needle attached, but I am going to tie a knot with that starter thread. And I did keep extra in case I wanted to add a clasp. I've decided that I want mine as a bangle, so I'm going to tie that down. Keep that needle and thread attached, and sew back through the project a couple times on that right angle weave with the needle and thread attached. What that generally does is pull that knot into one of the beads, and then by the time I sew back maybe 10 or so, 15 stitches, this other thread, when I burn it down, will be long gone. You can see the speed at which kind of I'm sewing through here. I'm not going to go through my multi-hole bead more than once because I don't want to see more threads stepping up from one hole to the other. But I can spin around, come down through that right angle weave, switch directions, and now I have 2 thread points where I can take my thread burner, burn down the thread edge right here, and with the silver next to the gray thread, you will not see it, burn down that one as well. Go back in if you had to add any more thread and burn down those to get your nice bangle. Thanks so much for joining me in making this Bubble Bliss Bangle. Great for rolling on. You can also make it longer and make it into an awesome rope as well. Hopefully this was a great eye-opener to you, helping you to learn that PRAW stitch, as well as working in those multi-hole beads and joining in that tubular peyote stitch. Remember, you don't need to use just the SOs and the bars and the RounDuo Minis. You can really have fun expanding and using a ton of different beads in this design. Challenge yourself to go through your stock, check what you have, and start creating. Remember that if you do need more help, we have those additional YouTube videos. If you haven't yet, hit that little button in the corner to subscribe. Make sure you do so to get regular updates from us here at PotomacBeads. As well as check out the links below the video and shop with us online if you need any materials to add to the design. Remember, you can also comment. We love to see questions, concerns, ideas, and really just inspirational ways to help out that beading community, adding into the comments below. As always, thanks so much for watching and enjoy your Bubble Bliss Bangle.